Hey guys. Welcome to Utah State University. We teach Latin here. Nobody has spoken Latin as their native dialect for 1,400 years. But here at Utah State University, you can get a minor in it. All you've got to do is take these classes, Roman history, one of these three classes. I like the one called Latin and Greek Element in English, whatever the heck that is. And count them 7 credits of upper division courses in the Latin language, which again, no one has spoken in 1,400 years except for people who are majoring in Latin. Now, I'm not knocking this. If you want to study Latin, study Latin. That's totally cool. Carpe diem your precious little hearts out. Seriously, cura te ipsum, that's sort of Latin for you do you. Because while it might be funny to tell people you spent several years of the best years of your life and a whole lot of tuition dollars studying a dead language, the truth is that Latin is a perfectly acceptable academic discipline. And if it wasn't, it wouldn't be a minor, a major, and a graduate field of study at Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Dartmouth and Brown and Princeton. Right now, as we speak, there are people paying for Ivy League educations pursuing degrees in Latin. And nobody's calling those people idiots because they're not idiots. Those people are scholars. Those people include people like this. J.K. Rowling studied Latin. So did Mark Zuckerberg. These people aren't idiots. One is the richest author in the world, and the other is the 5th richest person in this world. Now, you might be wondering why I start this conversation about journalism off by talking about Latin. I tell you all of this because if you decide that you are going to study journalism, either here at Utah State or anywhere else for that matter, you are going to have people try to convince you that you are making a terrible choice that is going to ruin your entire life. Your friends will tell you this, your parents will tell you this, some of your professors will tell you this. They're going to ask you to get used to saying things like, do you want fries with that? They're going to tell you that journalism might as well be a dead language. They're going to say it doesn't matter anymore. They're going to say there are no jobs in journalism. That's their favorite thing to say, there are no jobs in journalism. They're going to call you crazy. That's noise. I've been told that I'm not allowed to swear in front of high school students, so I'll just leave it here. You know what's actually crazy? Not studying the thing that you actually want to study in college. That's crazy. Because you really only get one shot at this. There's pretty much one time in your life when people are going to tell you, hey, you know what? Cura te ipsum. You do you. Study what you want to study, learn what you want to learn, pursue what you want to pursue, have some fun. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. When it comes time to get a job, outside of the hard sciences, degrees are degrees are degrees. You can see this in the job ads. 4-year degrees are incredibly important and increasingly mandatory. Yes, graduation is something that is important, but nobody asks for someone who has a degree in Latin or a degree in history or a degree in journalism for that matter. To the vast majority of employers, liberal arts degrees don't signify expertise in something. They signify the ability to engage in critical thinking, to experience a wide range of issues and ideas, and yeah, the capacity to play well with others and occasionally jump through some hoops. That's what a 4-year degree tells an employer. Look, we've got hundreds of people studying history here at Utah State. You want to know how many of them go on to become historians? Not many. But history graduates become teachers and business managers and real estate agents and police officers. History majors become comedians at like a ridiculously high rate. I don't know why that is, but Steve Carroll, Conan O'Brien, Larry David, Will Forte, Janine Garofalo, they were all history majors. All of this is to say that when it comes time to choose your major, if you're pursuing a hard science like biology or chemistry or engineering, then yeah, sure, Absolutely. You need to be very, very thoughtful and very, very cautious about what you choose because your academic lane is your career lane. But if you're looking at studying a liberal art or a social science, that's history, sociology, Latin, philosophy, communication, and yes, journalism, then here's my advice for you. Do what you want to do. You do you. Cura te ipsum. Now, if learning a dead language sounds like a lot of fun to you, then I am very pleased to introduce you to my colleagues in the Department of Classics. And if reading really long, really old, really dusty books sounds like fun to you, then I'm equally pleased to introduce you to my friends in the History Department. And if writing really long, double-spaced, typed, perfectly formatted, precise academic papers sounds fun to you, then I'm more than happy to walk you over to the English department. And I want to make this clear, I'm not knocking any of this. I was a political science major when I was an undergraduate. I examined the intense minutiae of long-dead political theories and wrote big, long papers about them that nobody but my professors read. Actually, I'm not even sure my professors read them. They probably didn't. I loved every minute of that. It was glorious. It was awesome. It was beautiful. That was great. But if you don't want to do that, if what you want to do is go out and meet people, if you want to learn something new every single day, if you want to be able to share what you've learned with other people, so that when you learn, it's not a selfish act, it's an act that engages and includes the entire community. If you want to learn to tell stories that both enlighten people and entertain people, then I want you to consider studying journalism. Now, don't get me wrong, our students have to read long books, and sometimes they have to write long papers occasionally. We've got quizzes and we've got homework, we've got finals like everybody else. But more than anything here, we learn by doing. We send you out with a notebook and a story assignment. We put a camera in your hands and we say, go use it. We put an audio recorder in your hands and we say, go find a story. We send you to sporting events. We send you to city council meetings. We tell you to go meet scientists and entrepreneurs and entertainers. We encourage you to go and ask hard questions of people in power and to use the power of your voice to help others who can't use their voices. We tell you to have adventures. We tell you to go jump out of airplanes, to hike into the wilderness, to travel around the world looking for stories. We teach you to be storytellers. And along the way, we teach you some other skills that are going to come in handy no matter what you decide to do when you leave college. Yeah, I told you that all liberal arts degrees are pretty much created equal. They are, but skills are not all created equal. And the skills that you learn studying journalism are in demand everywhere, in every sector, in every job field. Staying cool under pressure, meeting deadlines, being attentive to detail, making complex information more understandable. Yeah, these are valuable skills if you go to work for a newspaper, a radio station, a TV news channel, a magazine, a social media organization, whatever. These are also skills that are in demand no matter what field of work you go into. I used to work for a newspaper. And newspapers, as you are probably aware, they're not in great financial shape right now. They haven't been for a while. That's owing to a shift in the way that people get their news. And back when I was a newspaper reporter, I was constantly worried that I was going to lose my job. And I was terrified by the idea that if I lost my job, there was no way I was going to find another because I believed that I didn't have any other marketable skills. Because I had listened to people who said that journalism was a dying craft, that it was like Latin, that nobody would ever want to hire me. And then one day I got a cold call from the department head at this university. And he invited me to come and apply for a faculty job here. And you know what I learned really quickly? The skills that made me a good journalist made me a good teacher too. And then one day, not long after that, I was asked to help out with the social media for an organization that helps high school dropouts get back to school. And you know what I found out? The skills that made me a good journalist also made me really good at communicating with young people about the obstacles that had pushed them out of school and the opportunities to get back. And then one day I got a call from a geneticist who I'd interviewed for a newspaper story. And he said, "Hey, I like the way you write. I want you to write a book about genetics with me." And I didn't know anything about genetics. I'm pretty sure I failed every science class I ever took in my life. But you know what I learned? The skills that made me a good journalist made me really good at making science accessible for people. And I've written 5 books since then. 1 is an ebook that you can get online. 2 are in bookstores right now. 2 more will be in bookstores by the end of this next year. These are books from major publishers. I got paid good money to write them. And I was on the phone with my agent yesterday. She has 2 new book projects for me. They're lined up to start next month. People are lining up to pay me money to write books. Over the past few years, I've been to 7 or 8 different countries doing journalism. I was in Cambodia covering the legacy of genocide. I was in Colombia hanging out with a guy who used to work for the world's most notorious drug lord. If you've seen Narcos, you know this guy, right? I was hanging out with his former personal chef, who taught me how to cook piranha perfectly. I was in Ethiopia writing about ritual infanticide, and I was in El Salvador reporting on family separations long before it became the most important political issue in our nation. For my latest book about record-setting life forms and what we can learn from them, I got to hang out with scientists who are studying dolphins and whales and elephants and cheetahs and falcons and microorganisms, and it was so much fun. Right now, I'm working with a guy from Harvard Medical School who's trying to cure aging. I'm launching a radio show on Utah Public Radio starting next month. I'm headed to Brazil in a couple of months to speak at a conference of educators who also work with high school dropouts there. I still do some social media. I still write for newspapers. I still write for magazines. I get paid for all of this. And I don't say that to brag. I say that to emphasize the fact that journalism skills are in high demand. Because our world needs storytellers. Journalists, yes, we need journalists. But we also need advocates and activists. We need marketers and politicians and scientists and teachers who can tell stories. We need more storytellers. We need you. And we want you. But I want you to forget for a moment what we want. I want to know what you want. And I want you to know what you want. And when you get to school next year, in a few years, whenever, I want to know what you want to do with your time. Choose to study something you're going to enjoy, because you only live once. So carpe diem, curate ipsum, and please let me know what I can tell you about studying journalism in college. That's it. And y'all are journalists, so y'all got questions. Y'all are journalists, so y'all got questions.
What was your biggest worry about writing the textbook about genetics when you said you didn't know anything about it?
My biggest worry is that I would make a fundamental mistake that would cause scientists to laugh at the book that I wrote. I figured I had it down enough that a lay audience would be fine with it. What I really worried was that a geneticist would read it and go like, this guy's a fool. And he makes what we do look foolish. As it turned out, that didn't happen. It got well reviewed in the mainstream press. It got well reviewed in the scientific press. The geneticist that I'm working with right now on the anti-aging stuff at Harvard hired me in no small part because he had read that book, that first book, with a different guy. So I guess I did okay. And I learned so much. Yeah?
What are the 2 books that are in bookstores right now about?
You can buy Longevity Plan, which is about a small village in southern China right along the Chinese-Vietnamese border where people live extraordinarily long lives and extraordinarily healthy lives. These are people who reach their 100th year and they're still working in the fields. Yeah, and they're super happy and they're super mentally acute. Like they're with it. They're amazing. That's called Longevity Plan. That was co-written with a cardiologist named John Day. And then the first book I wrote is called Inheritance. That's with a geneticist named Sharon Mohalem from the Children's Hospital in Toronto, which they call Sick Kids Hospital, which is like the worst, most un-PC name for a hospital ever, but everybody's okay with it in Toronto, so I'm not here to criticize. That book's about epigenetic inheritance, what we're learning about it, and what we can learn about the way our world is evolving.
So even though you have a political science major, you still choose to write about like science and humans. Like, so how do you use your political science major now? Do you use it or?
That's a great question. Yes and no. I could have majored in anything. And in fact, let me clarify something. I studied political science. I was majoring in political science. I got to the end of my undergraduate time at Oregon State University, and I lost my scholarship. I'll let you speculate about why, that's fine. I lost my scholarship, and I needed to graduate quickly, so I went to the registrar's office, and I was like, what can I graduate in? And the registrar said, we have something called liberal studies, and you have pretty much everything for it. Do you want to be a liberal studies graduate? And I was like, I don't care, I want to be a graduate. Nobody has ever asked me what my degree was in when I was applying for a job, right? Nobody has ever said, like, is your degree in journalism? Is your degree in writing books? I guess that would be an English degree, I suppose. Is your degree in science? No, nobody has ever asked me. You know what they want to know? Can I communicate? Can I meet deadlines? Can I not screw up? That's what they want to know.
And how do you show them that?
Work product, right?
And how did you get that in college?
Over time. I'm sorry?
And how did you get that in college?
I worked at the student newspaper. Is that what you're getting to? I worked at the student newspaper. It changed my life. I was not intending, when I went to school, I was not intending to be a journalist. I got to school. I had a scholarship. It paid my tuition, my books, my fees, room and board. All I needed was money to take sexy fellow students out on dates. That's all I needed. And my roommate said, hey, didn't you say your dad was a journalist? And I said, yeah, he was. And she said, you should come and write for the student newspaper. It pays like, I don't know what it was, like $12 per story. And I was like, that's pizza money. Couple, 3 stories a week. That's, pizza and beer money. All right, we can do this. So I went to work for the newspaper. Within like the first week, I was like, my life has changed. I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And it's a good thing too, because by the time that I had graduated, I already had a full-time job. I was already working professionally. It was because I found out I really love talking to people. I really love learning new things. I love becoming a miniature expert on something new every single day. These are the things that you do as a journalism major. And if you're not a journalism major, these are the things that you do as a member of student media. You can major in anything. I mean, look, I want you to major in journalism, right? It's cool as you know what. I'm doing a good job not swearing today. It's cool as you know what, but you know what? Like, I didn't. I was working for the student newspaper.
And why didn't you?
Why didn't I major in journalism? My school didn't have a journalism major. We had lost journalism as a degree 10 years before I got to my university. It went down the road 45 minutes to the University of Oregon, and our student media organization was better than theirs. It always was. Yes?
So when you wrote for CNN, what did you write about? Like politics? Is that?
Written a few pieces for CNN. My piece about how the legacy of genocide impacts people doing family history in Cambodia. So Cambodia has this burgeoning population of Mormons. Okay, but most of the missionaries don't tell Cambodians before, as they're in the conversion process, about the obligation to do family history. They don't mention it. It's actually not like most missionaries don't tell anybody this, right? It's like, oh yeah, we do family history stuff too, it's really cool, right? But it's not front and center usually in the conversion process, right? The conversion process has to do with like getting to know Jesus and, right? Okay, that's, oh yeah, and we do family history, which in almost any other place in the world is an okay thing to be like, and this is this other thing that we do. But in Cambodia, family history is an incredibly painful experience. And so there's all of these new Mormons in Cambodia who are trying to align their deeply held new religious beliefs with their detest for the idea of going back in time and having to learn more about family members who turned on each other and killed each other. And then, by the way, having to give those people an opportunity to be posthumously baptized so that they can live happily in the same realms as their family members. It's an incredibly painful experience. So that was one of the stories that I did for CNN. Another piece I did for CNN was in Ethiopia. One of the first pieces I did in Ethiopia, which is about 3 tribes in southern Ethiopia who practice a form of ritual infanticide called Mingi. And they believe that Mingi is an evil spirit that materializes mainly in babies, and that when a baby who has the Mingi spirit is allowed to live, it brings a curse on the village, and the sun gets hotter. And the sun gets hotter, the crops dry up, the animals die, the people die. And that's a really bad thing. So they kill babies to prevent the Mingi spirit from taking over the village. Yeah?
How do they know what raping is?
Mostly, it's because the baby's top teeth came in before their bottom teeth.
So they're not even babies, they're like toddlers.
Yeah, you're usually about 1 year old when they're identified as Mingi.
How do you know?
The different ways. If a Mingi child is identified very, very early on, because there's some other ways they do it too, but if they're identified very early on, they take dirt, they stuff it in their mouth, and they bring it out to the bush, and they leave it there, and then the hyenas come. If the child is older, their top teeth come in before their bottom teeth, usually they'll take them in a canoe out into the middle of the Omo River, and they'll throw them in, and then the crocodiles come. Yeah.
Quick question. If you can remember back to when you, your first journalism story, whenever that was, if it was high school, if it was college, wherever it was, do you remember what the first story was that you wrote and what obstacle you felt like you had to overcome where obviously you didn't feel like you were a journalist yet?
So I was on my student newspaper in high school. I don't remember much of high school. The first story that I wrote for my college newspaper was a profile of the student body president. His name was Mike Caudill. He was a wrestler and a gregarious guy with a great smile and a good handshake. And I completely negated my duty to speak truth to power. I walked in, I gave him a softball interview, and then I wrote a flowery story about what a great guy he was. The first time I realized that I was like a real journalist, there was a protest on our college campus. This anti-abortion group came with these really large, huge signs, like billboard size, like twice the size of the screen, that had pictures of aborted fetuses on it, and they were holding them up and like, this is what abortion is. And the university was trying to like shut down their protest, which is obviously like a violation of freedom of speech. And there were people who were like trying to hold things in front of the billboards, like giant sheets, which is not a violation of freedom of speech because it wasn't being done by the government, but is not really in the keeping with free speech. And on the other hand, there were pictures of aborted fetuses on our campus. And covering that story through the evolution of it, a day that started with people screaming at each other and ended actually kind of quite beautifully with the protesters and the counter-protesters sharing a basket of fruit together because they were both exhausted from yelling at each other all day. telling that story, I think I realized, like, at the end of the day, like, wow, I'm doing journalism now. This is what that is telling stories that are hard to tell and helping people make sense of them. Yeah.
You spoke really passionately about not letting those voices of friends and family tell you not to do journalism, not letting that get to you.
Yeah, those
so
people.
Did you ever have a period of your journey where like that kind of got to you and you had to deal with a lot of that, and how did you overcome those struggles if you had any of those?
Okay, so when I left high school, before I left high school, I joined the Navy. And my father, who had grown up during the Vietnam War, said, son, you can do anything you want. I will support you, but please don't join the military. Do anything but that. And so it's like, I'm joining the Navy. And then when I was in school, college later on, and I went to work for the student newspaper, and I came home one day and I told my father who was a journalist, I told my father, Dad, I think I want to be a journalist. And my dad, who had already been laid off from one newspaper in his career and knew how little money journalists make and how hard the work is, said, son, you can do anything you want in life, but please don't be a journalist. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a journalist. And look, like, even outside of people who tell you, like, from your own family and friend networks, like, I was a journalist, I was a professional full-time journalist at the tail end of a time that I really consider to be kind of a golden age in journalism, where newspapers were still making money and they were hiring freelancers and they were sending people around the world, and I took my first 5 or 6 international reporting trips on somebody else's dime. That was amazing, right? So at that point, I didn't have a lot of people going, you're going to be working in fast food someday. Which, by the way, nobody should make fun of people working in fast food. That's a hard job. Like, sorry, I digress. To answer your question, here's what does happen, even in the best of situations. You write a story, and the next morning, you go to your office, there's a little light on your phone blinking, you pick it up, you hit voicemail, and the first person is like screaming at what a liberal pinko commie you are. And then you're like, star delete. And then you pick up, and then there's another message. And that person is screaming at you just as loud, with just as many swear words, about what a fascist right-wing nut job you are. Nobody likes you. The left hates you, the right hates you, which is usually a pretty good indication that you're doing your job. When the Salt Lake Tribune recently laid off a bunch of employees, it was really pretty horrific. They wrote a story about the fact that they were laying off a bunch of employees, and of course there's comments on the bottom that are not moderated by anybody. And it was, some people saying, oh, this is really too bad, sorry, but it was a whole bunch of people who were like, good, because you're a bunch of liberal pinko commies, or good because you're a bunch of fascist right-wing nut jobs. Which is a pretty good indication that the Salt Lake Tribune's been doing its job, because the wackos on either side of an issue can't stand the journalists. We live in a world right now, though, where there are more and more wackos, because they live in these bubbles. They don't even know they're wackos. You gotta, your heart's gotta go out to them. They don't realize, because they live in these confirmation bubbles where all they hear from is other wackos. Their Facebook friends are all other wackos, their Twitter friends are other wackos, and anytime somebody says something from outside their little bubble, they're like, those people are wackos. And so those bubbles are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's little space in between. And at our best, that's where we live as journalists. And so increasing numbers of people in our society kind of hate you. And that's hard. If you're a person who likes to be liked and needs to have people like patting you on the head and saying, good job, you did your best, it's probably not the career for you. That doesn't mean it's not the degree field for you, because again, getting a degree in journalism doesn't mean you're going to necessarily go out and be a journalist. If you want to, by the way, you can. I've been here 6 years. I do not recall a time, and you can ask the other professors here too, they can back me up on this, or they can tell me I'm full of it. I don't remember a single time where we had a student who wanted to go into a journalism field upon graduation and they couldn't find a job. That's in the worst environment for getting journalism jobs in apparently like decades upon decades upon decades. And newspapers are crashing and dying all over the place. But man, I'll tell you, look, if you don't expect to make a ton of money in your life, or at least in the initial years of your career, you want to go work for a newspaper, there are newspaper jobs to be had. There are magazine jobs to be had. There are definitely TV jobs to be had. Definitely radio jobs to be had. We're placing students there left and right. If they want to do that, they're doing that. Yes, sir.
Go back to noise.
Yeah.
How do you overcome your internal noise? How do you deal with that?
I work a lot, and I never listen to it. It's not always easy. What you do as a journalist, what you do as a storyteller at your best, if you, I think, or at least for me, is you tell the stories that are hard to tell, which means that you are exposing yourself to stories that are hard to hear. That's not always easy. I talk pretty straight-faced about covering stories like the war in Iraq and gang warfare in El Salvador and tribal infanticide in Ethiopia. That's a lot of practice, but it's not always easy. Again, separating out getting a degree in journalism from being a journalist, okay? If you're going to be a journalist, I definitely recommend therapy. I don't mean like get therapy to convince yourself not to. I mean like if you are going to do this work, you should have someone to talk to on a regular basis who's got your back, who's got your brains back, because it's hard work. It's not easy work. And by the way, I mean like you want to be a police officer, you want to be a firefighter, you want to be a paramedic, you want to be a public school teacher. There's a lot of jobs like that, right? Like we do not encourage people nearly enough to get the mental health care that they need. If you would go to the doctor for a banged up knee, you should go to the doctor for a banged up brain. It's not that hard. There's no such thing as being tough. Like I cover wars, I cover genocide, I cover all kinds of stuff, right? Like on the outside of things, like, oh, like that's a tough guy. Like, yeah, it's not. I got a therapist who like watches me break down every week. What else? What else can I tell you? Ma'am.
Kind of along those lines, when you're in the field and you're seeing these things and you're trying to make a decision between being a reporter and helping people out, how do you make that decision?
I believe, and I choose my stories based on this idea, that being a reporter helps people out. The work that I do contributes to people's understanding about the issues in our world, the suffering that's in our world, the united nature of our humanity. Largely that decision has been made before I even hop on a plane. There's one over here.
Yeah, those big stories when we went to Ethiopia and Cambodia, did you go there for that stories, or were you there and you found the story?
No, I went there for those stories. I don't go anywhere. I don't invest my time, my safety, other people's time, other people's safety on whims. I invest in those things when I know that there's a story and I believe it needs to be told. I tell students, I take students overseas sometimes, and I tell students, before we hit the ground in whatever country we're going to, 95% of your reporting should be done. What you're going for is confirmation and color. You're not going for hard facts. If you're missing out on the hard facts, I mean, we'll get more hard facts while we're there. But if you don't know the basic structure of your story before you hit the ground, you have no business being there, because you are putting people out in the best case scenario, and in the worst case scenario, you're putting people in danger.
Follow-up question, how did you how were you able to join those stories, or how did you get those stories to go do them?
My first international reporting story was in Israel and the West Bank. I was in college. I got a grant to go overseas and report on the peace process, what was then a peace process. It's since fallen apart. And after that, I just kept my eyes open, much like I do when I'm walking through campus. I'm always looking for stories. When I was covering local small-town politics at a little tiny town in Oregon, my first professional job, I would walk around town and I would keep my eyes open for stories. It's not hard. You guys probably already had this experience, right? Like once you start looking at the world as a potential source of stories and realizing that you have every right in the world to be nosy, it's hard not to be. And so now I just like my world's bigger. And so I see things that are happening and I say like, has anybody asked about this? And if the question is no, if the answer is nobody's told that story before, I start looking for ways to make it happen. And you can't always. You got to find somebody who's interested. You got to find somebody who's going to back your work. I've paid my own way places before because I believe in the story. That's worked out. But that's a big gamble. Yes, sir.
About whale poop, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I'm in Oregon ask your question.
Oh, my bad. I mean, the story was awesome and everything ended up being awesome, but like oftentimes as teachers we have to give students assignments that they don't want. Like they literally have to write about what they would consider to be poop.
Yeah.
How do you get kids, students motivated to write about the
Poop is cool.
stories?
Poop is cool. All right. So first the whale story, and then I'll get to your question. All right. So I call this whale researcher for my next book, or for the book I'm writing right now. And she's from New Zealand. She's working in Oregon, off the coast of Oregon with gray whales. And she invites me to come with her to study these whales. And I'm like, great, super. So we hop in this little Zodiac raft, 3-person raft, and we're like right behind these gray whales. And she says, all right, Matthew, here's your job today. And she hands me this net. And she says, when the whale poops, we're going to bring the raft right up behind it, and you're going to scoop out the poop. This was the condition for me being able to be. Now, whale poop is like gold. It's like scientific, solid gold. Because from it, you can figure out what whales have been eating, obviously. You can also get genetic information, so you don't need to now take pictures and try to compare those pictures with other whales, right? You know which whale it is based on the genetic signature in their poop. You also can get hormone levels. For instance, cortisol, which rises and falls in relationship to how much stress we have and how much stress whales have, which is something whales can tell us about ourselves because their cortisol rises and falls in response to stress just like ours does. To do that, you have to, somebody's got to scoop the poop. And that was my job. I had to scoop the poop. I'm totally willing to do that for the opportunity to hang out for an entire day with this scientist and have her all to myself. To pick her brain, to learn what she's doing, to get ideas from her, to understand how she sees the world, totally worth it. Sometimes you got to scoop the poop. Right? There's great stories there. Mike Rowe does this, I don't know if he still does, did a series called Dirty Jobs. Right? This guy, his entire shtick was that he found people with really horrible jobs and he hung out with them for a day and did their job with them. There are great stories to be had there. There are great stories to be had when you're chasing the poop around. There aren't any bad stories, right? There's bad reporters. My buddy, who's the managing editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, he's fond of saying that if you want something to be important in your community, just put your best reporter on it. It doesn't matter what it is, because there's so many stories to tell in every aspect of life, that if you just have somebody who's a great journalist chasing stories around, that will become important to the community, and it always does. You had something? Somebody had something? No. Did you sleep last night? Are you okay?
I drove up here
From West Jordan?
Yeah, I drove 2 hours.
So far, 2 hours. My God, you poor thing.
My car was sleeping.
Your entire car. And she's still sleeping.
Are you serious? You gotta
All right, ask me one more good one. Somebody ask me something that's going to press me. Somebody ask me that. You already asked a question. Yeah.
When you're working on those books with the scientists about their studies that you're doing and you're writing the book for them, what is that relationship like where you're trying to maintain the academic integrity of the information while still maintaining your personal voice through the writing that you're doing?
So a lot of times I'm writing with them, so I'm writing in their voice, which is great. Like, it's awesome because I don't have to take accountability for anything. I mean, my name's kind of small on the book, but I'm the with, right? But let me step back from that then and let me broaden it out, right? Because I think what you're asking about is like balancing like a journalistic relationship. Okay, we have kind of a teamwork relationship. When I'm writing a book with someone, we're a team. And so, you know, just like any other team, sometimes you get along better with your teammates, sometimes you get along worse, sometimes you have conflicting ideas, sometimes you have the same ideas. What you're really working toward is like this cohesive moment where you're in sync, and out of that comes this product that like everybody loves, right? The tougher thing for me, and I think for a lot of people, isn't when you're working with someone, right? It's when you're working at cross purposes with someone, right? Not a whole lot of people in those tribes in southern Ethiopia really were all that interested in CNN publishing a story about how they kill babies, right? Not a lot of gang members in El Salvador really all that interested in like telling people like how they extort and kill people in San Salvador, right? At first, the chef in Colombia didn't really want to talk to some guy who was going to be like, hey, there's this guy who used to work for Pablo Escobar who now runs a restaurant in Colombia. Because Pablo, he'd been dead for a long time, but he's still got a lot of enemies. So you're not always at similar purposes. Not everybody doesn't always want their story to be told, right? And sometimes you got to respect that and just go like, okay. And sometimes you got to say like, okay, why? What can I do? How can I make this happen? And oftentimes, if people really don't want their stories to be told, and that's not just like a politeness thing, like, oh, well, if you don't want your story told, that's fine. That's like a, but you're the Vice President of the United States kind of thing. So sorry, we're going to tell this story. I'm the worst person to give you advice on this, though, because I've burned some bridges. I'll tell you who the best person to give this advice is. Y'all should have him next year when you do this. His name's Tommy Burr. He's a Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Salt Lake Tribune. He's the former National Press Club president. Tommy Burr has taken down more public officials than I can name. And you know what? Some of them still send him Christmas cards. There's one guy, Tommy wrote a story about how this guy was stealing gas from the county. He was a Salt Lake County official. He was stealing gas for his cars, like using his county credit card to put gas into his car and his wife's car and his kids' cars, right? And over the years, he'd stolen like thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars worth of gas, right? This guy went to jail because of Tommy's reporting. They're still friends. I don't know how you do that. But I do know it's possible because Tommy does it. So, look, like, sometimes what we do is at cross purposes with what people want us to be doing, right? The best of us in the best situations are able to still be a human being while we're doing that work. And I do believe it's possible. Okay, one more, and then we should probably move along and do something else that's more exciting than this. Yes?
Have you ever, like, while you're reporting on the story, have you ever, like, crossed a line that you didn't really realize that you crossed until later? Or have you always been like, yeah?
Okay. Undoubtedly. Now I got to figure it out, though, right? George W. Bush in the later months of his presidency, not pregnancy, his presidency, was asked if he regretted anything, and he was like, no, not really. You gotta go, like, a little introspection, buddy. Maybe just a little self-reflection. So, okay, I know there's got to be something. I'm not going to tell you not really. Have I crossed a line that I didn't intend to cross, didn't mean to cross, regretted crossing? few years ago, I and a student were chasing a story in a foreign country, and we got a tip that if we went to this certain place, we could get more information, we could get a bigger, fuller story. Ordinarily, I wouldn't think twice about going like, okay, whatever. Like, there wasn't much information there. The place we were supposed to go was like this part of town that we didn't know. Also, we were supposed to go there at 2 a.m. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's go. And we're in this little tuk-tuk, the little three-wheel taxi, right? And we're going like into these dark alleys. There's no street lights. The roads are all bumpy. There's people like standing. I mean, there's like the sharks and the jets, but scarier. You guys know the sharks and the jets? Yeah. Okay, it was like, I mean, there's practically guys like on the corners going like. And the whole time I'm like, oh, this is fun. And then I look over at this young man, and I just see like this like look of terror on it. It's like he was scared. And I realized like I had taken a student someplace that I should have been more conscientious, right? Like I was showing him what journalism looks like when you do it the way I do it. But I was also responsible for him, and that was a really bad idea. Now, everything worked out fine. It was totally okay. We didn't get mugged. Nobody brought out any knives, right? I mean, like, there was no, like, you know, like this dance, right? But in that moment, like, I realized, like, actually, what I should have done there, and I knew I should have done it. I knew I should have told the tuk-tuk driver, turn around and go back. And instead, I was like, he'll thank me for this experience. And that was a bad idea. There's probably been 1,000 of those. There's probably been 10,000 of those. I have been fortunate to win some awards for ethics in reporting. Several of them. In fact, I got one just recently. And what I always say about those awards is this: you don't get awards for ethics in reporting because you made good ethical decisions. You get awards for ethical reporting because you got yourself into a situation where there wasn't a good decision to be made, and then you went through a process of figuring out like the best of 2 options, or 3 or 10 or 20 options. Reporting's hard. Like, sometimes you do things right, sometimes you do things wrong. We have a mandate under our code of ethics to seek truth and report it. We also have a mandate under our code of ethics to minimize harm. Those things are constantly in conflict. And if you're not living in that place on a fairly regular basis, that place of conflict, you're probably not doing your job. The problem is that when you are doing your job, sometimes those things are in conflict, and you've got to decide. All right, you guys have a whole, yeah, sir.
Can one be a journalist without putting their life in danger all the time?
Yes, you totally can be a journalist without putting your life in danger all the time. I will say that it's getting increasingly hard. I'm not saying, like, look, like, it's not the riskiest profession in the world, right? There are far more dangerous jobs. But again, like, going back to those phone calls, right? Those just aren't phone calls anymore. Like, people threaten the lives of journalists on a regular basis. Most of the time, it's a bunch of baloney, right? But it happens. And look, I know Chauncey Bailey, who was a colleague of mine at the Oakland Tribune, was gunned down in the streets in Oakland because he got too close to a story that involved a local gang that was exploiting people and threatening people, and Chauncey was just doing his job, and he was killed over it. But to answer your question, not every journalist does that kind of work. Look, like, there's journalists who cover music, there's journalists who cover sports. Sometimes they have their lives threatened too, but there are journalists who cover culture and television and movies. There are journalists who cover the ballet. As far as I know, nobody's ever had their life threatened for covering the ballet. Could happen, but the range of jobs in journalism is as diverse as we all are. I do a bunch of stuff over here, and other people do a bunch of stuff over here, and that's not good or bad. That's not right or wrong. That's not real journalism and fake journalism. There's only 2 rules as far as I can tell for doing journalism. And those 2 rules anybody can follow, regardless of if you have a journalism degree or you're getting paid to be a journalist. The 2 rules are this. Are you out looking for true stories? And are you seeking to tell those stories to a mass audience? That's it. You do those 2 things, you're doing journalism. There's a whole bunch of like ethical stuff and financial stuff and professional stuff and whatever, but like that's not required, right? What's required is tell stories using facts and seek to do that to a mass audience. That's all. And if you're doing that, and by the way, if you got a Twitter account, if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook, right? If you've got a blog, if you've ever written anything that you believe to be true and was intended for an audience that was greater than just you, then you have committed an act of journalism. And regardless of if you come to Utah State or anywhere else and study journalism, I would tell you this, go and do that some more, because that's good for us. Thank you.